All right, I guess we should get started. We're going to move to the DBA side of the world this afternoon. We're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about monitoring, and I don't know what Grant's going to talk about. He's going to do something, I think, later. So, today this is core monitoring. I'm Steve Jones. I run SQL Server Central. For those of you who may know the site, we publish daily information. And then I work for Redgate Software. They purchased my site, and I've been working there 5 or 6 years, and it's a great company, and I enjoy this. I enjoy coming over here to SQL in the City. So our goals today is kind of understand the value of monitoring. I'm not going to ask how many of you don't have monitoring in place, because probably a lot of you wouldn't tell me the truth if you did or didn't have monitoring in place. But I do want to convince you that it's a good idea and you should have it in place. Talk a little bit about baselining, and then give you some details about the core items that I think are good to monitor. And it's not just my opinion, but I have information from some other people that think it's a good idea. So what do we monitor? Probably the first reason most people monitor is your phone rings one day and somebody tells you that a job failed, a system went down, a piece of software is not working any longer. We monitor because things break, because we have failures that we don't expect. And we don't like getting yelled at, so most of us want to know as soon as something happens so that we can fix it. That's the kind of core reason that we monitor. And it's a good reason to monitor things. If nothing else, being able or being aware of when something fails so that you can respond very quickly and get it back working, hopefully before customers realize, is a great reason to monitor. The other thing is that your workloads will change. Over time, you hopefully will get more users or maybe less users. You'll have a different set of queries going through your system. And all those things can give us the famous Twitter fail whale, where things don't work correctly. They slow down, which is important to know. They may not work correctly. They may tip over completely. But the second reason we monitor usually is to anticipate some potential problems that are going to occur, or be aware that we are on a trend that may cause us problems in the future. And the last thing is, outside of users and outside of hardware failures or software failures, we have evolution in our systems. Most of us will deploy patches, will deploy software, will add features and enhancements, and the actual queries, the actual software itself will evolve over time, and it may change the way the system responds, even with the same load, the same number of people making the same types of calls. As we change the underlying infrastructure or change the underlying software, you may have problems. And it's good to know before you have problems, but it's good to know when you have problems so you can react as well. So for monitoring is really, at its core level, being aware of the state of your system at a point in time. Right? Monitoring is just having a snapshot, whether that's CPU, whether that's transactions, users, any kind of metric that you want to take, and being aware of what that is at a point in time, and then tracking that over time, having that appear, second to second, or minute to minute, or hour to hour, and being aware of how that system is kind of changing. Monitoring should also include alerting. That's a core component that, without alerting, you can't respond very well. Alerting, though, doesn't mean that my phone goes off or a pager rings or anything else, because alerts can be very valuable in and of themselves to just let you know the state of a system, even if nobody else knows there's a problem. As an example of what that would be, I used to work for J.D. Edwards, who now is Oracle. It was PeopleSoft and it became Oracle, and we built ERP software. I ran the production systems, database systems for J.D. Edwards, and we had 400 or 500 instances of SQL Server that we had to manage. And there were 2 DBAs. We managed 400 or 500 instances, 2 DBAs. The way we did this with a lot of automation, but we had a lot of monitoring in place as well. And one of the things that we monitored on a regular basis was backup size. Why do we monitor backup size? Well, backups in SQL Server are essentially the data. And it's important that we know roughly how much data we're dealing with. But we also want to know if that was changing. So on a day-to-day basis, we would track the metric of what the database backup size was and what the backup size was yesterday. And that could change as your systems grow. We had an alert that would pop up if database size grew by more than 10% in a day. Because for none of our systems did we expect data to grow by 10% a day. If it did, nobody got a page, nobody got an alert. What happened was the two DBAs got a daily email that had all the backups that occurred and jobs that run, all that stuff that we needed for ISO compliance. But at the very top, we had alerts, and the alert was this database grew by more than 10%. Not that it's a big deal, but we just want to be aware as DBAs, when something grows by more than 10% in a single day, I could potentially have a problem, because if that happens about 9 days in a row, either my database is going to grow or the system's going to grind to a halt. So we want to be aware of that happening. So it wasn't a critical alert, but it was an alert that we pinged to the DBA so that we are aware of the changing state of the system. And then you can have alerts that come through pagers or cell phones to let you know right away, but there are other alerts that are important in monitoring as well, and they aren't necessarily critical alerts. For SQL Server, since that's why most of us are here, really our monitoring includes a few areas here. We do want the hardware stuff, the metrics that tell us about performance of either the physical hardware itself or the virtual hardware that we're emulating. We want to be aware of all those metrics that let us know if we are exceeding capacity, if we're getting close to capacity, or if we're not using it at all, which is an important metric. But we also want to know at an instance or database level the types of metrics for SQL Server that let us know how it's performing or what type of load is being placed on it. So it could be something, transactions, we might want to know the batch requests per second, we might want to know how many index scans are occurring or how many index seeks are occurring. Those can be valuable numbers for us to track. We might want to know wait stats, not because we want an alert that fires on wait stats at any particular moment in time, but over time those wait stats become very valuable when we're trying to troubleshoot or tune our systems. But we also may want business metrics as well. I don't know a lot of people that use these, but a lot of your business people run these reports. You guys are familiar with reports? People run them every day. Those are business metrics. And some people run them every day. I've had managers that refresh the web portal every hour so they can see what's going on. But there are metrics, those same type of metrics that are often included in reports or that we often write queries for to give to users can be valuable metrics to track for ourselves in monitoring because they let us know, is the system performing the same today as it was last week? Is it getting worse? Is it getting better? Anybody read this book out of curiosity? No? I haven't either. I'm just asking. But if I told you that we had a query that we ran today, it took 48 minutes to run, you think that that's fast or slow? Hopefully everybody said it depends. I heard a few different answers, but we don't know. It doesn't really matter, right? Fast or slow is all relative. Back in 1905, Einstein came up with his first paper on relativity, where he started to talk about how we reconcile the speed of light in different frames of reference. Because at the time, people were struggling to understand how come if I measure the speed of light this way and I measure the speed of light this way when I'm moving, it's the same. It should be different, according to all the Newtonian physics we have. And one of the ways that he came up with when he was trying to measure speed, or he was thinking about it, is that speed is a function of distance and time, right? It's a rate. The thing that he came up with that nobody had done before that was that he determined, or he theorized, that time is not absolute. And that was a revolutionary concept, that time is not absolute, that the time depends on the frame of reference you're in. And so in terms of light, it was a way to reconcile how the speed works, whether we're traveling at a speed or across the direction, with the direction, or anything else. And that's kind of true because it's all relative. And any of the numbers that you measure, any of the statistics you come up with that you use, whether they're for your performance metrics or business or anything else, are all relative. My former business partner, Andy Warren, was telling me about a business recently that he blogged on where they were selling cookies. And this was kind of aside to this little shop in his town. He said they sold $160 worth of cookies a day at $1 a piece. And he was like, that's kind of a good number. And I said, well, I don't know if it's a good number. You know, what does it cost them in materials and time and effort to sell $160 worth? Because it could be a good number, it could be a bad number. Across a month, it sounds like a fairly big number. I did $160 a day. But if I've got to take staff away from something else to do that work, if I've got to buy any equipment or anything else, it's not necessarily a great number. And the point is everything is relative, and that includes all these metrics. So it's important that you monitor across time because you don't know if any of your metrics are good or bad if you don't monitor across time. When we do monitor across time, what we come up with is called a baseline. And this is really a long-term view of my metric. In essence, it's either a graph or maybe just a list of numbers that let me know how things have occurred at different points in time. These baselines are important because they tell us what's normal. They tell me that 48-minute query ran in 60 minutes yesterday, and so I'm like, I did a good job. Or they tell me that it ran in 5 minutes yesterday, in which case it's going to be a bad day, right? Because somebody's going to call me. Having a baseline allows you to determine what's normal and what you can expect out of the system, and then it'll let you know whether you're underperforming or overperforming according to that metric. Baselines also give me the ability to do trending, which is slightly different. That allows me to kind of see how things are improving or deteriorating across time, which gives me warning. That gives me advance notice of the way that my system might perform in the future. It also allows me to do extrapolation. Most of us are probably on, anybody on a 2-year hardware refresh cycle? 3 years? 5 years? The speed of today's machines, the quality of today's software, you could easily be on 5 to 10-year life cycles. We're not at the point where we plan on ripping through a new laptop, a new server every 2 years. At this point in time, they're almost commodities. And so when we do have to make that decision, we all want to know what decision we need to make, but we also want to make sure that it will last some period of time. And having this baseline in place for storage, for the IOPS that I may need, or the processor that I may need, that allows me to extrapolate into the future and go, I think I need X to survive 5 years into the future. Okay. As an example of a baseline, this is off monitor.redgate.com. That's a site where we run the Redgate Monitor product ourselves, and we take live data off of SQL Server Central. And in this case, this is I have a 2-node database cluster that runs active-active. And we take this data, we actually replicate it to another machine, and it's about a minute old, and then you can actually look at it on the web live and see what's happening. On the second node, this is number 2 of this cluster, the SimpleTalk system runs. And as you can see, most of the time, my processor just kind of idles along, right? Just goes along. We could say, if we looked at this in a vacuum, that we overbought hardware for that particular database. For anybody that's technical here, that's a DBA, you like this, right? It means my phone's not going to ring. 20% all day long and not going to ring. If you're the CFO or the COO, this is wasted money. All this space is wasted money. It's not being used. Back in February, we had a failover. SQL Server Central failed to this node. And we can see for a period of time, it was hours here, that the load substantially increased. Now this can tell you a lot of different stories. One is we've correctly sized this hardware in an active-active cluster to handle the load of both instances, which is good. I like that. As you can see, SQL Server Central has a lot of space in here. That, of course, assumes that, to some extent, I have sized both these nodes together at the same size. If these are disparate sizes, it could look a little bit differently if something happened. But it also tells me that something went wrong. When this happened, an alert fired off to our IT staff, and people over here in Cambridge were actually able to figure out what was wrong and fix it with the help of our hosting provider before I woke up in the morning. And I got an email that said, your cluster failed over, if anything broke, be aware that this had actually happened. This is a valuable tool for us over time, though. If we were planning, we could say, we know we've got a lot of overhead on this node. If we add the second node, we have less overhead. Now we'd need to look at the other side and see how much that was using on a regular basis, because one particular day or this set of few hours may not be representative of the other side of this cluster, but it does let us know that at least for this point in time, things worked well. All right, so let's talk about what you can monitor, what we want to monitor. There's lots of stuff we can look at. We have Windows level performance counters. We have SQL Server level performance counter. Those of you in a virtual environment may have hypervisor counters. SQL Server Central actually runs in a virtual environment. Those are virtual servers that are clustered. We have management metrics, which we'll talk about. We could have other details in terms of trace or extended events that we want to track as well. There's all kinds of lists available out there. You want to be really careful as you look through these lists because one of the things we find with the internet is that information that's published doesn't really go away. Okay? And across time, we may learn more, we may find that the things that we looked at 2 years ago are not the things we look at today. There are better ways to look at information. The other thing you want to be careful of is that a lot of the lists out there are fairly version specific. So the things that we monitor in SQL Server 2000, we wouldn't monitor in 2005 or 2008 or 2012. The other thing you have to be aware of is that I can't tell you what to monitor. I can't say, monitor these 12 things and you'll be fine. Because the list of things that you want to monitor will vary a little bit by your application and by your environment. It will be somewhat unique to you. And it will be because you have unique requirements. You may have different metrics that are important for your particular application. So you have to be aware that anything that you take as a list will not be complete. So I'll give you a bare bones of some things to monitor, but you will have other things in your environment that are important, and you want to make sure that you add them to your list. On the performance level, I've got this list that I actually took away from Brent Ozar, and I've got the link here that you can. Often, there was just no load on it, you didn't know. One quarter, I actually got a call from the CFO saying, we can't access the system on the 14th of the month. Why isn't it there? Of course, I had to call my DBA and say, why isn't it there? And it turns out that they had scheduled some maintenance and they had taken it down because it was never in use on the 14th of the month. Right? But nobody really on the DBA side was aware that the hardware guys had taken it down. We didn't have a monitoring system in place that would say, oh, it's down. We can call and say, why is it down? The administrators would go, well, it's maintenance. We go, great, we know. And somebody calls us, we can go, it's down. Or we could surface that information to our customers and say, it's going to be down for these days because it's not normally being used. That same thing has happened in other companies where developer machines or servers will go down, and because we don't have any alerting in place, we aren't aware that they've gone down, even though nobody's using them. And then the next morning or after the weekend, somebody comes in and things are broken. Having these types of alerts can be important for you to respond ahead of time. All right, so let's look a little bit at performance monitoring. And I want to show you a couple of different things here. As soon as I find my, there it is. Hopefully this will work. It's still on Hyper-V. We had some problems this morning, and we're going to see. So some of you are probably aware you could actually access performance counters from inside SQL Server. You can actually run queries where you can see I've got a counter object in a specific instance inside SQL Server. So I could actually run these types of queries and track this data inside SQL Server. I could store this in a table. Here I can actually limit it for user connections. Whoops. For user connections, I could just get one value. I could track this value, put it in a table, store it with a timestamp, and build my own system over time. Probably some of you have done this. I know I've done this myself in the past. Very easy to do. We're good at managing data. We're good at building, inserting things in the tables. We know how to do that stuff. I can even go to a specific instance. In this case, I can look at my log weights. As you can see, there actually are multiple counters here that I have. But I can access all this in SQL Server. Probably more of you, though, are familiar with this particular tool. How many of you used this thing before? Everybody's used this, right? First place you go is your phone rings, somebody goes, something's broken, you go right here and go, all right, what's the CPU look like? And you can see here real easily, I think Justin broke my machine. You know, I'm counting this in real time. You don't want to do this on a server. Please don't run this on a server. This tool actually, like Profiler, adds substantial overhead to the system. But what you can do in modern OSs, so we have this thing called data collector sets, and I can actually add my own set of data. And I'm just going to go through a couple of things here. As you can see, I have a directory. By default, it goes to your root drive and perf logs. Let's close this. When I look at this set, I think this is the one I just did, I actually can see what I'm monitoring here, what I'm going to do. Let me go down one more level. By default, in this template, I'm grabbing all of these counters. And what I'll do is I'll sample them every second. I'll store that data in a very efficient binary format. I could store it in a comma format as well. And I could track all this data. I'm going to remove some stuff here and just add a couple things back so that we could see them. So processor, that's always a good one, right? We like to monitor processor. Makes us feel good. What else can we monitor? What else do you guys like to monitor? Memory. Memory is a big one too. Let's pick a specific counter. How about page reads per second? How many page reads do you have per second? You don't know, right? You got to know what the system normally does. What else? How about, let's go back up here. How about physical disk? That's always a good one. I like to monitor physical disk. Let's look at, how about, I don't know, seconds per read. Okay. I can stick these in there. And if I were to start this, it'll start gathering data. So on my system, it'll just start collecting this data. Every second it's reading this kind of stuff. How many of you run Profiler before? Okay, good. Yeah, I'll know how to do that. So we'll see if you know how to do this. Let's create a new trace on this system. Let's use Windows Auth here. Now, Profiler is a great tool for tracking things. There again is a lot of overhead here, so you want to be careful. I typically use this in terms of a GUI just to set this up. So for me, I'm going to add a couple of columns here. Because I can never remember the syntax, this is an easy way to do this syntax piece. Let's go over here and add start time as well. Let's filter it. Now I could run this. Typically what I would do is I would stop it right away and I would script this trace as out. And that would give me a trace, set of trace code that I could run on the server with very low overhead. This GUI's got a tremendous amount of overhead. I'm not going to do that for this demo, but we could do that. Let me run a few queries here. Let's go to, I've just got a few queries. Go back. Nothing special here. These are just queries that run on AdventureWorks. They do just some different joins. We're going to aggregate, pull back, I think, 30 or 40,000 rows across a few different queries here. But, you know, there's a little bit of load on my system now. It's actually doing some things. If I were to go to Profiler, we'd see some data running through here. So 14,000 rows. Let's run that again. Runs a little bit faster this time, as we expect. I'm just going to run it one more time. So I've got some data. And this is complete. So let's stop our trace. So I've got a bunch of data here. Those of you that have run Profiler before, I could have included CPU and other things as well in here. If I have reads, that kind of thing. Let me save this data for a moment. And let's just stick it up here. And we're going to erase my other file. Yes. I'm going to open that back up because what I really want to do is I want to use that, I want to look at other data as well. Let me stop. Oh, I didn't start this. Well, that's bad. Kevin, how come you didn't tell me to start this? You weren't paying attention. guys. Kevin was supposed to be watching out for me. Let's do my tuning template again. So you see I've got CPU over here. There are reads and writes as well. Let's do this. Let's just let it run, doesn't matter. So we'll run our queries again a few times. It should be gathering some data here. Yes. Have any of you ever combined trace data with performance data? A couple of you, not very many of them. It's actually a very nice feature that was added in 2005 or 2008. But it's kind of a nice feature that allows you to actually kind of look at this data in a new way and see what impact it has on your system. All right, so we'll say save, we'll overwrite this. We'll stop this one. Why is it stopping? Well, that's weird. Is it? Well, let's see. So I should have a little bit of data in there, right? Let's see. Obviously, this is somewhat sensitive data, so I have a bit of data in there. So if I actually were to pull this trace file back up, and I have to open, I don't know why I have to open it back up, but I just do. In here, I have this import performance data little item. If I go find one of those trace files, hopefully I picked the right one. Let's try the latest one. Yes. I've got binary data in here. And you can see I've got those 3 counters that I added. And I could choose, if I had multiple counters, oh, I actually have all these in there. I can add these counters in there. I'm going to actually only want one. Let's pull this back. These asks, there we go. So now if I were to actually troubleshoot the problem, you can see that I've got a graph of my performance data in addition to my trace data. And as I roll through here, what we'll see is that the bottom graph moves. So if I look at one of my queries and I want to see what impact it has on the system, I could come here as well. Let's go down here. I could see where I'm actually executing that's caused things to move. So here's where I started my use statement, and there's other stuff that monitor's running, but then I've got, get to my AdventureWorks level in here somewhere. This allows me to correlate the results on the system with the metrics and measurements that I've done. And I could use this type of system. I could run those traces myself. I could use PowerShell or scripting to build this stuff, and it works just great. But it's cumbersome. It's a lot of work. I have to manage this data myself. I have to manage those files. I have to manage turning on and off traces. Now, Redgate, we make a product that tries to make this easier for you to do. And the whole idea behind SQL Monitor is that we manage all that data for you. We manage all that tracking. We manage different metrics. We try to provide you with a system that's easy to use, and we include alerting as well. Now you can see on my local box here, I've got my Windows host and I've got my SQL Server instance. And if I were to look at some of these alerts, you'll see that I have various alerts, just long-running query in here. I think this is the time in Denver right now. Log backup, integrity checks, things like that. This machine isn't run very much. You know, it comes up for demos and things and then it goes down. So log backups and things like DPCC don't get run because the machine's shut down. And so when it comes back to wake, it realizes it's 2 days later and things haven't run. If I were to look at analysis, I could do that same type of analysis here, and you can see that I've actually pulled up some counters already. And here is, in real time, some of those queries that I was just running in AdventureWorks. And so if I wanted to actually look at what's happening on my system, I can do that here as well. I can do long-term trending and baselining, that kind of thing as well. And maybe more importantly is that I can add any other metric I want in there. So if I'm trying to figure out if I've got problems of a certain sort on my system, for example, maybe I'm worried about memory on my system, I can add my own metrics. Now we've got this site, SQL Monitor Metrics, where people can share their own metrics, or you can go download them. You can automatically install them into SQL Monitor, but you could just run them in your own system as well. You could run them as your own queries and manage the data yourself if you want to do that. So I've got an example of a metric that my buddy Grant Fritchie created that looks at low physical external memory. And so if I wanted to put that into SQL Monitor, I could stick this into my own system as well. I could just stick this into a query that runs in a job and it emails me the results every day if I wanted to. This is just a query. If I run this here, it's just going to give me a result. In this case, I have a virtual machine, which is perpetually low on virtual memory. But that same query that I ran there, I stick into here, and I can say, well, let's just run this. It doesn't really matter, does it, for all databases? At master, I think, yeah. I collect the data just like you did Performance Monitor anywhere else or any type of system that you might build or set up. I can also use a calculated rate of change, which is an interesting option that I can not really care about the metric. For example, we run the SP Blitz script from Brent Ozar on the SQL Server Central servers, and it perpetually returns 80 faults for various reasons, but it returns 80 faults. We don't really care that it returns 80 faults because I know what the faults are. Some of them need to be fixed, some of them do not need to be fixed. But I would care if that number went to 82 because it would mean that something had changed. And so if I were using a calculated range, then that would only look for the changes between executions. And so the rate of change would become the alerting point and not just the number itself. In this case, for a low memory alert, we actually just want to have, if 1 comes up, I can create an alert for this. Please give your alerts better names. And I can decide if I want to alert above or below a threshold. In this case, for memory, depending on the criticality of your system, you might say, well, I'm not going to do anything. I can't buy memory today. I'm only going to just raise a medium alert if this goes above 1. And then just say, I'm going to enable this alert. And what would happen is that this would run every minute, which is probably not what I'd want to do for a memory alert. But and anytime it would happen, I could get that alert. It could come to me in real time. I could have it emailed to a box that picks things up. I'd have any number of choices there on how to do it. Inside SQL Monitor, we actually allow you the ability to do anything you want, but we include a bunch of alerts. Because there's a lot of people that are accidental DBAs, or there's a lot of times where when you get a new server, you may forget to do much more than just get things installed. We make it really easy so that all these alerts by default are set up. So things like looking for disk space, looking for your backups not being set up. Probably plenty of you have in fact installed a server, set it up, added SQL Server and an application, and forgot to install backups. Has anybody ever done that? I've done that plenty of times. And you realize a week or 2 weeks later that no backups are running and you fix it. And it's not a big deal, but we have those alerts. A lot of people don't realize they need to run DBCC. Hopefully you realize that you should run DBCC every week, if not every day. Everybody does that? I'm not going to ask for a survey because some of you would lie to me. But if I were to do it by default, we give you a low alert if you haven't run it in a week. Because it's not critical to the operation of your system. DBCC is an insurance check. What it does is every day you don't run it, you're raising the risk that you're going to lose data. Okay? You may not run it for a year and be fine. You may not run it for 2 years. But at some point in time, if you run a database long enough, you will get some corruption in there. And so it's important that you run this on a regular basis because you never know when you're going to get that corruption. You could raise these alerts, you could enable these to say, hey, I really do care that if I haven't run it in a month, it becomes a really big deal, and I want to surface that to somebody. SQL Monitor is there to really make life easier, to transfer knowledge between people, and to just smooth the entire operation of monitoring your servers. You could do this any number of ways. You could do it yourself, but then you're managing a piece of software, and that's not what everybody wants to do. If you want to do it, there's nothing wrong with that. SQL Monitor is there to just make it easier for you, and that's what we try to do at Redgate, is make your job easier. All right, how am I doing on time? So monitoring is great for performance, trying to figure out what's going on, but it's not just for performance. And you ought to be aware that there are other things you can monitor. For example, as I showed in SQL Monitor, we do the DPCC checks. You may care about fragmentation. You may not, depending on your system, but you may. You want to know backups. Job duration is a great one. This is like checking that backup size every day. If this changes substantially, it's usually an indication that either something in my system has changed or I have a potential problem that's coming. And so I want to know. And I want to know both ways, actually. Because if a job is substantially faster than I expect, that can indicate a problem too. If I have an ETL load, it takes 90 minutes roughly every day, and it takes 2 minutes tomorrow, chances are something broke. Something didn't get loaded. And if I can learn about that quickly, a lot of times I could fix that before somebody else knew about it, or before it impacts the business. Disk space, anybody ever run out of disk space on the SQL Server for AutoGrow? Right? It's easy to forget because you run out of disk space after what? Like 18 months of having a database. If you don't have monitoring in place, it's easy for that to happen. And setting up disk monitoring is just a pain. It's just a pain. There's no good way to do it. There's no standard method that works great. Having a tool makes it really easy for you to do that. But you should monitor disk space, by the way, and monitor your database space. You should monitor like quarterly. Long-running queries, monitoring down, that kind of thing as well. The other thing you might think about monitoring is business processes. Trying to understand what the load is on your system, and then correlating that with performance. That'll tell you if your software is working better. Are those changes making things more efficient or less efficient? How much business users are they actually using the system? You can surface this data to your customers and let them know from your monitoring system what's going on. As a matter of fact, the way we license SQL Monitor, you could actually install a monitoring server that monitored all your performance stuff and install a separate server that just did business stuff. Because we care about the monitored servers, not the monitoring server. And you could send emails out to your business customers and say, this is what's happening. Orders went way down or way up. If it goes way up, that's a great metric to send to somebody because somebody's really happy when orders go way up. Those are great things to do. For development, we've talked about CI/CD today. You could track all kinds of metrics on how your development system is proceeding. Not so that you yell at developers or you try to figure out if they're slacking off or not, but you can help people learn to be more efficient, and you can provide positive metrics back and say, you guys are doing a great job. You're getting things done. Show them the things they're doing well. Often that will inspire them to do more of those things. It's a much better way of approaching your problems than yelling at them for the things they don't do well. As an example, I know this may be a little bit hard to read, but if you were to go to monitor.redgate.com, you could go look at this whole list. These are all custom metrics that we gather, that we've added in there. And a lot of these are business metrics. So if we see for Simple Talk, we look at views per second or comments per minute. SQL Server Central, we look at posts and views on the forums. And these help us determine if the system's performing well or not performing well, or is the content that we deliver to you stuff you like or don't like. If we see it and it works well, usually we have a good trend. Here's forum views per post. When this goes down, it means I have a lot of spam and I have a lot of other problems. When this number's steady or going up, it means that people are looking at the information. It's coming up on Google, it's being searched. It's a valuable metric over time for us to look at and go, we're doing a good job or bad job. This graph I like to show to my boss because they go, it's going up. It's always good, right? Nice at review time to talk about this stuff. So let's look at how you would do this in the business world. Let's imagine that I have a little admin database. Let me make sure I didn't create this, did I? No. So we'll create a little admin database. Probably lots of you have done this in the past. As a matter of fact, I would encourage everybody to do this. Every instance, create a little admin database where you can stick stuff that you care about. First time I did this was because I was tracking SP configure, because I had developers that like to change things to see how parallelism worked and things. So I would just track SP configure every day, and I would compare it to the previous day's number. And whenever it changed, then I go yell at somebody, because then I know that somebody made a change. All right, has anybody built a DDL trigger before? A few of you. So I'm going to create a little table where I can keep some information in there. What didn't run there? I think I highlighted the wrong thing. Oh, okay, created. I'm going to create a trigger, and what I'm doing is here, looking for create table, alter table, create procedure, drop procedure, function, view. I'm just looking for a variety of events that can occur in SQL Server. When it happens, I want to stick a row in this table. This is the poor person's auditing system. How it works great for developers. I've got a development database though, and I want to create that same database, or sorry, that same trigger in there. These triggers for these database level events are at the database level. They're not server-wide triggers. So, we create a little procedure that allows me to read this data. All this is doing is it's going to pull data back from this table. Okay, nothing magic about it. It's just kind of an auditing procedure. But there are potential problems in there. The advanced T-SQL people would notice that this is actually a rather poor way to write this procedure. Okay. I've got let's make a custom metric here. In this case, I'm going to copy this T-SQL. I'm going to use SQL Monitor because SQL Monitor makes this incredibly easy for me to do this stuff. I could put a job together. I could write an application that pings this table every once in a while. There's any number of ways I could do this. I'm just putting names in there because Grant yells at me for typing in demos. But I still do it. I don't want to calculate the rate. Let's just run this every minute. We'll add an alert. And we'll just do a medium alert. I could do a high alert, but developer changes I'm not getting out of bed for. These are just changes I want to know about. So let's create this. And I've got a little metric here. Now I've got two of them that are firing. Chances are my physical thing will fire. Oh, it hasn't. Okay. So I've got my buddy Joe. See here, I've got Joe. He's logged in. Joe is a developer. He's got to do some work. Just normal work, create a procedure, create a table, nothing magic about it. Oh, Joe got an error. That's right, because we got to add Joe to this database. That was the error that popped up earlier. We'll just add Joe in here. Oh, he's in there. Did I? Did it not go to, just having the demo issues today, aren't I? Let's see, is it not in here? It's not in there, you're absolutely correct. Let's fix that real quick. Let's see. And we'll have to change the database here. I don't think that was the error though. No, right at the top, the very first. Oh no, you're right, it wasn't there. So, let's see if Joe can do his work now. Of course, you want to be careful with these DDL triggers because they do cause problems. Why isn't that there? It should be there. Oh, look at that. That must have been what fired there. Look at that. Somebody's paying attention. It's hard to pay attention from up here at times. There we go. I could do some other development work, right? The same stuff that I'd normally do there. And let's say I drop those. If I were to actually go back and look at that table, let's just run my procedure. Well, I don't want to run that one actually right now. I've got actually events in here, right? These are the various items. You can see recreating this table. They just did, it appeared in here. The trigger is actually grabbing information. Joe is grabbing this information. These aren't big alerts, right? But tracking this stuff from an auditing perspective does a number of things. Number one, it allows me to be aware of the state of the system. Number two, if I'm the DBA that's responsible for managing the downstream servers, the QA server, the production server, I often want to know when this stuff is happening, because this allows me to go back sometimes and figure out why a deployment broke, because I can see what things were changed. On a production system, I typically don't want to ever see anything in here unless I did it. That's one of those compliance things or separation of duties that you should be aware of every entry on a production system that causes a change. Putting auditing in place this way would allow you to do that. In terms of my SQL Monitor, I should actually see my alert here. There is a high alert from my server. But I can track these alerts as well, that a developer made a change. And in this case, you can see that we in fact had 4 changes occur here that would let me know what's going on. And this type of information alert on the development side allows me to just have a better idea of what's changing and just be aware of what's happening in my development environment, so I could be sure that I have control of it, or that I'm not preventing changes, I'm not stopping anybody from doing things, but now I'm aware of what's going on. I could do the same type of alert on a business side for tracking something that I care about for my particular business. If this is the same type of alert and the same concept that stock traders do in terms of when they set stop orders or limit orders, they want to know that when we reach a certain point, an action occurs. That same type of thing comes from a monitoring system. We could do that as well. We could take some action based on what we see here, whether it's a business alert, whether it's any type of database alert. SQL Monitor gives you the flexibility, really the same flexibility that you have in SQL Server to write your own job and your own query to track things and send an alert or deal with them. We may try to make it easy with SQL Monitor, but the important thing is that you actually try to put some monitoring in place that tracks the things that you care about, the things that are important for your particular environment. And the things may be different for different environments. You may look at your development environment and have different types of alerts and metrics that you care about than your production environment. And you may look at your financial system differently than you look at your CRM system. You want an easy way to set these things up. So I'm about done. The thing that I would like all of you to do or think about doing next week is go back and make sure that you have a baseline of your systems. Whether you use that with Performance Monitor, whether you talk to people outside and use SQL Monitor or something other tool that you should have some idea what a baseline is. And quite honestly, you should save every month off a rough baseline of what your system looks like. You should be able to take 4 or 5 key metrics, save those off for a week. Hopefully you have an automated system that can let you do this, and be aware of what normal is. When I worked at JD Edwards and we had all the servers, there were really only about 10 systems we cared about. I mean, we cared about them all, but there's only 10 that make my phone ring. And those are the systems that we made sure roughly every month or two, we looked at a baseline so that we were aware of what that system was doing. In case there was a problem, we could then compare that. Because I can't tell you how many times when he's called me and says the system is slow today, and the system isn't necessarily slow. The network is having issues. We could have people with a virus on their machine, or they run some other process on their machine that makes the client respond slowly. That was the most common occurrence. But if I don't have a baseline for my SQL Server, I can't tell them, is it slow or not? Because slow is always relative. So think about that. Think about setting yourself up for a monthly meeting, hour or 2 a month. Invite yourself, all your DBAs together, and review what you think a baseline is. How are the things look on the system? Look at disk space. I mean, that's just a dead easy thing to fix if you're watching it. You should never be caught without disk space. And then periodically, think about what counters you could add that would just make your job easier. What things could you look at that might warn you in advance that you're having problems? Hopefully we've kind of covered these goals. We're about out of time here. I don't want to go over anymore. Hopefully you've had a great day today at SQL in the City. You're learning some things. We're at least getting you to think. I mean, ultimately, I'm not trying to so much teach you things as I want you to think about how you could do your job better. And then at Redgate, we're here to try to provide tools that should make your job easier. And if they don't, please tell us and complain to us because we would like to know that. But please also fill out your evaluations. If you've got questions, you can ask me or SQL Server Central. We have a great set of forums. We're actually busier than the MSDN forums on a daily basis. So if you've got questions, please feel free to post them up there and somebody will get you an answer. And then this talk is sponsored by the DBA bundle. I say that for when my boss isn't here, but that's all right. If you want to learn more, I've got lots of blogs and I've got references and things at the end of this. So please download the deck, take a look at it, and again, if you have any questions, I'll stay up here in front and I'll take questions. Otherwise, you guys can take a break, and I don't know what's next. I think I talk encryption in the other room next, and somebody else is here talking something. So thank you very much, and enjoy yourself. All right, I'm just going to turn this off.
I've got a really simple question for you, which I could possibly have answered myself if I'd seen. You and your event fired at the end, your alert fired, when you did 4 changes, was there a way,